Welcome to It's No Secret, a podcast for those who want their money questions answered.
Join us as we talk to real Kiwis and share truths about our own financial lives, because the truth is, there is no secret to achieving financial freedom. Hello and welcome. It's No Secret, and today we are joined by an expert guest, Cam Irvine. Thanks for coming, Cam.
Thanks for having me, Kat.
You're so welcome. Cam has a wealth of experience in the financial services industry, first working for one of the most successful mutual fund managers in the US, and now as a highly qualified financial planner in New Zealand. Cam specialises in working with expats and those who have the bulk of their wealth in property, but most importantly, for me at least, he's super passionate and an advocate of data-backed investing. Recently, you and I caught up, Cam, down in your home city of Christchurch, and we had a really good yarn about a topic that's dear to our hearts, and that I think of like many of our listeners at It's No Secret, and that of course is index investing. No real surprises there. And I was bemoaning the fact to you that it's really challenging as someone that works in the marketing world of a index fund or like advice strategy, whatever you want to take the lens of, that convincing people on why index investing or passive investing is a good idea for them can be really hard, because often within the industry we rely on data, but not everybody is convinced by facts and figures. And in fact, as a marketer, you know that people are convinced by emotion. So it's very counterintuitive to all of a sudden be like plugging numbers down people's throats. And so that kind of started a bit of conversation between Christine and I around challenging ourselves to really get people interested in index investing without just relying on like, because the data says so. And so I wanted to add your voice to this conversation, because I feel like you had some really interesting thoughts, and this is presumably a conversation that you have with some of your clients on a fairly regular basis. So to kick us off, I guess, like, how do you think about index investing in general? And where does it rank in the order of like priority of, I don't know, favourite investment strategies? Is it number one?
That's
Are you allowed to pick a favourite?
Yeah. There's a couple things to unpack there. So that's a huge help to start with. I guess the way that I think about index investing is that's the starting point. So that's where I want to go to first. And if there's a reason to deviate from that, I want it to have a bunch of evidence and data to support that. But at least that's going to be the default mode. So we go there first because everything is going to be evidence-based. You want to start with, there's the greatest evidence, the greatest amount of studies. This is all the boring, scientific, clinical way of talking about it. But there's other things that play into it as well. And you and I talked about this briefly. There's emotional aspects to investing, or just about any decision. So not looking at the emotional or the psychological factors or how it affects a person's well-being means that we might be missing something. So if I see data on a spreadsheet or some kind of graph and chart, that's compelling. I want to know that. But has that also looked at the person or the individual and how they feel about it? There's an old saying in the world of finance, do you want to eat well or do you want to sleep well? And it's the idea of how you're investing is going to have an effect on your wealth. And we as people often think the two are exactly related. The more money I have, the more I'm going to feel better. And that is not what the evidence shows. It is actually the opposite. A lot of the time, stress and anxiety can go up. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But we want to untease those things and talk numbers, facts, and figures. Those are one thing. How a person feels about them are another. And indexing does provide some reasons emotionally and psychologically that can be beneficial for people. So I figured we could dive into a few of those. There's many of them, but there's probably 4 big ones that I think about. So
how do you ask your clients that in terms of that question of like, do you want to eat well or do you want to sleep well? Like, how do you get a gauge of what's important to them psychologically to kind of know, do I present this person predominantly with numbers, or do I need to like really get more into their psyche of understanding if this is going to keep them up at night?
It's a really difficult process. I couldn't give you a simple one-word answer that's perfectly true all the time. A lot of it is through chatting through conversations. There's something, here we go, boring. There's something psychologists call the hot-cold empathy gap. And it's the idea that when you're in a cold state emotionally, meaning you're not supercharged or very emotional at the time, we'll answer how we're going to react to things differently than when we're in a hot state. So if I say, hey, here's what I would do in this situation, And then you get into that situation and you find that that is not true at all.
You're doing the complete opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the hot, cold empathy gap.
Okay.
And so talking through those situations and then living through them give us a better understanding of how we're actually going to react over time.
Right.
So it's an ongoing process. It's not as though, hey, we talked about this once 18 years ago. We spent a full 30 seconds on it. We're good. We've solved it. No. It keeps happening over time.
Yeah.
So it isn't one thing, but understanding how a person thinks that they're going to feel, giving a little bit of that experience up front. Hey, what about this? How do you think about that? What do you think that would be like for you? Imagine yourself. I mean, visualization can be very helpful here. If you see your accounts changing in this kind of way, where are you going to be physically? Imagine yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
What is that going to feel like?
Yeah.
And that's a starting point as well.
Yeah. As you said that with the visualization piece, I was like, this kind of reminds me of this trend that I hadn't actually connected being associated to the hot, cold empathy gap, but is kind of a few particularly American, I guess, like well-being or psychology-based people. I don't want to call them influencers because they're not, but that kind of thing. You know, people in that sphere suggest, I guess, like really psychologically thinking through your worst case scenario states and forcing yourself to in what that reality feels like. So kind of, you know, playing out in your head, like what would actually happen to me if I lost my job? And I'm going to sit with that for 15 minutes and force myself to think through what are the actual things that would physically go wrong, to also prepare yourself for the fact that often the worst case scenario is not that bad. But then I guess to your point, also try and stress test, well, am I in that process reacting in the way that I thought I would have, and then also hopefully if that scenario does ever unfold, because you've kind of thought through it and almost mentally prepared yourself, you then react in the way that is in accordance with that, as opposed to the complete opposite, if that makes sense. So I love the idea of the visualization piece, because I guess it's that is a great one. I've never thought about that. Where are you logging in to see your KiwiSaver and, reading a headline, and then are you at work and you're logging in and you see that, your KiwiSaver's down by 20% because we're coming through something like COVID, and you're then freaking out, and then that throws your day off, and then you have a terrible day at work, and then that translates into how you get home and feel, and that kind of stuff people don't think about.
Totally. So that's actually a perfect example. And there's a bias that people are innately born with, and it's called loss aversion. And so this has been studied by psychologists. It was really prominent and kind of evolved out of the 60s and 70s.
Yep.
And now it's a little bit more well understood in the realm of finance, but also other things. It's also the reason that as you accrue more wealth, you don't necessarily feel less stress, because you think, oh, well, I'm stressed because I don't have any money. And then once you have money, now you're afraid of losing it.
Yeah.
And think about any time that you've seen your KiwiSaver balance or any type of money go down. How does that feel?
Not great.
The point is that when this gets measured, people tend to feel the pain from loss about 2 to 2.5 times greater than they do a gain. So if you have $100 in your balance and it goes down to $90, you've lost $10. In order to feel psychologically and emotionally back even, you have to gain about $20 to $25 just to feel, okay, I'm fine again. So it has to go back up to about 120, 120, 25.
Yeah, wow.
That's interesting. And that's evolutionarily speaking. If you think about humans in the way that we've been growing for a long time, if I'm on the savannah and I'm in a tribe and I'm just trying to stay alive day to day, if I hear a rustle in the grass, it could be a lion or it could be nothing. Now, if I think that it's potentially a lion and I say, I'll just take my chances, that's fine. I'm probably not going to have many children, if any. The person that says, I'm going to treat that like it's a lion even if I don't know.
Yes.
And so they protect themselves. So that person then has more children, and that gets hardwired into us as people. So we want to protect what we have. And that's in the wetware. That's in the brain.
Yep.
So loss aversion means that we can't distinguish when our balance goes down from mortal danger. If you go into an fMRI scan and look at brain images of people who are seeing their balances go down, it looks the same as somebody who's afraid for their life. Our brain just can't distinguish between the two. So psychologically speaking,
fascinating.
Yep, it's a little bit scary.
Yeah.
So in the realm of indexing,
Yeah.
if you've got a big basket of investments, and I'll pick on a couple of indexes just for an example. Let's say the S&P 500, because a lot of people
Everyone
know it.
knows it. Makes sense.
It's a big player.
Yeah.
500 of the world's biggest companies. That's a lot. It's not everything, but it's a big chunk.
Yeah.
Now, if you're picking individual investments, the odds of one of those going insolvent is actually, it's not zero. It's reasonably high. It's about 40% over a 40-year stretch. That means that 40% of US companies went bankrupt between 1980 to 2014 from a study by JP Morgan Chase. That's a lot of companies that don't make it. Now, if you're invested in one of those companies and that represents 5 or 10 or 50% of all of your wealth, you're in big trouble.
You're going to feel that. You're going to have a giant lion panic reaction.
That's a big lion reaction.
Yeah.
Yes, well put. Now, if you've got 500 companies or more, 1,000 or 3,000, a couple companies going bankrupt, it doesn't even really have an effect.
Yeah.
So indexing gives you more diversification than something else just naturally. And because you've got more diversification, you've actually lowered your risk. So psychologically speaking, it's a little bit more comfortable for that reason, plus a few others.
Yes.
But that's one.
But that's a really good one. Yeah, that is a really, really good one. So then I guess in terms of like some of the other psychological reasons or things that we wouldn't think of that we maybe need to protect ourselves from, interested to hear what else you talk to your clients about, because we have sort of a favorite saying at work where like, you're your number one problem when it comes to investing. You know, you're your number one problem of like getting in your way. You're also your number one benefit in that like you're the person that can really maximize your chances of success. Not so much like picking the market, timing the market, obviously, you know, picking even necessarily the S&P 500 versus a total world. Like ultimately your behaviors and what you're doing around those investments is really the thing that's going to kind of catapult you forward or take you backwards. So yeah, a lot of people, I think, you know, focus so much on trying to understand like the market and is this the right time to invest and is this the right market to invest in and do I choose New Zealand or do I choose overseas? Whereas what I'm hearing from you is it's like if you just spent maybe 15 minutes, half an hour, half a day thinking about understanding you and some of the things that are hardwired into us as to why we may or may not be successful, you're going to be miles ahead of like the general investor.
Totally. That's exactly right. There's other weird things too where there was a study done in the States. So it may not apply to everybody around the world or in New Zealand, but the typical US worker spends about 7 hours a week working on their personal finances. That's not an insignificant chunk of time.
Yeah.
3 of those hours are usually in the workplace. Now, if you're thinking about your productivity and you feel overworked and you're losing 3 hours because you're working on your personal finance, substitute that by doing 15 minutes a month, for example.
Yeah.
Well, you've just gotten 3 hours back in the workplace or potentially 6 hours and 45 minutes every week.
Yes.
That's a lot more time back in your life.
Yep.
That's also kind of nice.
Yes.
So it does have these weird flow-on effects from just making the simple decision because I agree with that 100%. You are your biggest benefactor, but you can also stand in your own way.
Yeah.
I'll use myself as an example, and I've said it before. I know that broccoli is healthier than ice cream. I have no confusion about that. But if you put both of them in front of me, I can tell you which I'm going to choose. It's just difficult to make that decision and to look inside and say, I'm not sure I have the willpower to make the right choice all the time.
Yeah.
So if that choice is alleviated, I don't have to choose that each week or each day or waste energy doing this. I can just do something that's much simpler and has better outcomes.
Yeah.
I want to do that.
Yeah. Love that. So if you had someone come to you, like I think, you know, many investors in New Zealand have, like traditionally they've come with a background of investing in property, investing in their own home, maybe buying an investment property. Perhaps they've dabbled in the share market in the past. If they're a little bit older, have been burnt by like the 87 crash, or if they're younger, perhaps have seen their parents or grandparents been burnt by that. And they come to you and they're looking to grow their wealth, diversify, do something, but you get the sense that they're resistant to investing in the share markets. How do you start to get someone okay and comfortable with understanding, I guess, the top content that we've talked about and index investing and why share markets are volatile and risky, but also that can be a good thing?
Probably just ask. What makes you uncomfortable about this? What's the reason that you feel like this is a little bit risky? What do you know? What do you not know? What do you want to know as well? Yep. What would actually make you feel more comfortable? And sometimes we don't really know those answers. That's fine. To be honest, if you look at people and ask them a very direct question of what would make you feel better, we give an answer that we believe is the case, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's always true. It's just our best guess at what would make us feel better.
Yeah.
So my best guess is that the ice cream will make me feel better than the broccoli a lot of the time. Yeah. But it's not going to. No. But by thinking through those scenarios, and you could call it a thought experiment, you could call it visualization, or talking through those situations, that's usually where we can start to figure out, oh, I'm a little bit nervous because, for example, grandma and grandpa or mom and dad, they lost a bunch of money back in 1987. Okay, well, tell me a little bit more. And then we find out what actually was the situation. So either we don't know, we don't have enough clarity, and that's okay, or we do know what happened. Well, they invested in a few different companies because a broker gave them some hot stock tips. Okay, well, either way, we're starting to get to the source of what really happened. If you were an index investor in the 1980s, from 1980 to 1989, you would have suffered a lot during 1987, and then 1988 was still a bad year. So it wasn't even like, oh, it was one real tough year. No, it was a long time. But if you went from 1980 to 89 and invested, you would have made about 11 times your money, despite it getting cut in half in 1987 and 88. That's a pretty good gain. But in the smaller context of looking at what happens in 1 year, we may not see that.
Yep.
So getting to the heart of what's really going on here is where we want to figure out. That's the meat of it.
Yeah, I love that. So many things to think about here. So I guess, okay, so let's say, people are a little bit concerned about that. I mean, what else then do they need to think about in terms of investing? Where else do we trip ourselves up?
Perfect. All right. So here's where indexing can be beneficial, again, from a psychological point of view. This will probably apply more to a few groups of people. Younger people, people that are single, and typically men or more masculine types of folks. FOMO. And there's a few reasons for that, but I'll give you a common example is you might be talking to somebody and it's a friend and they're talking about some investment that they made that's been so amazing, or they've heard really good news about something coming up.
Sure.
We've probably all been around somebody that has bragged about how well they've done in some capacity. So they talked about, oh, well, I just invested in Palantir or Erie Insurance or Dell because they all got added to the S&P 500 and they made a huge gain. Or Auckland Airport's raising capital, I want to get in on it. Or I invested in Xero in the early days. Whatever it is, here's the beautiful thing. If you're an index investor and that company is included in the index, you have it too. You actually already invested in it. So while somebody's bragging about, oh, I made this brilliant investment choice, me too. I've already got that. I'm not missing out on it. I've actually got it included in my portfolio.
Yep.
And the difference is you didn't even have to make any effort at it. Because it was included in the index, it was already there.
Yep.
The reason this is more relevant for some groups of people is typically the groups that I mentioned, people that are younger or single or male, tend to be more competitive and try to do more investing to be very clever. And because of that, they'll tend to outperform. That isn't always the case, but statistically, there's a lot of people that fall into that group. So the worst group of investor, young single men.
Yeah.
That might hurt a little bit, and it's painful to hear about, but that's also worth understanding. Well, if I'm the worst investor or of the group of worst investors,
Yes.
I want to know that because I don't want to be the worst investor.
Yes.
I want to be
Yeah.
better.
Yep.
So I have to understand that the FOMO thing is really difficult to get over. But instead of trying to find the needle in the haystack, that's the special investment, you can buy the whole haystack. That's a pretty good deal.
It is. Out of interest, do you know what the group is of like best investors?
Mm-hmm. Married women.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it married, slightly older women?
Yeah. And there's a few reasons for that. And I'm not trying to type or put anybody in boxes, but generally speaking, women tend to be more oriented on their own goals and values, whereas men tend to be, or single people or younger people tend to be more oriented on chasing investment returns or saying, this is the next hot thing.
Mm-hmm.
Women feel more secure that I know what I'm trying to do, and if this is a vehicle to help me get there, I'm not going to change course.
Yeah. 7 versus 9 versus 11% is somewhat irrelevant as long as what I've chosen is going to get me to the outcome.
Correct. Yep. And understanding that that's a little bit of the journey. That's the path that we're going to go through anyway. Yep. Relying on experts as opposed to becoming overconfident, which is usually, like you said, one of the individual investors' biggest problems is overconfidence.
Yep.
Thinking, oh, I can do this. I have more control. I'm more clever than somebody else. That might be true. But even if you're more clever than me, which most people are, that's fine.
Yeah.
Are you more clever than the person who makes $1.5 billion a year with a team of 400 PhDs and CFAs and analysts, people that all have Ivy League educations and have spent the last 35 years analyzing data?
And have technology that you could never afford or even have in your own home?
Correct.
Yeah.
Are you smarter than all of them? Because you're competing against them too. You're not just competing against me or you, okay? There's a lot of very smart people out there.
Yeah.
And you have to be smarter than them. You also have to know more, and you have to do it. And that's the hard thing is even if you're smarter than somebody, it's not necessarily enough. What you do with your money makes the difference. It's not just what you know about your money.
Yeah.
In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice.
Yeah.
In practice, there is.
Yeah.
So
it's so funny you say that because we had someone in our extended family that, like many people, probably unsurprising to you, single younger guy, post-COVID, got really into like trading direct stocks himself and, particularly in the US market, and got to the point of really wanting to almost try and attempt to make a bit of a full-time income from this, which my husband and I kind of joked about because once I heard about this story, I was like, I just can't engage in this conversation because I will be too much for this person. So I'm like, I'm just going to let this play out and see where it goes. And the funny part for me was they actually used IB software for a while. So they did a play environment for quite some time, like, let's say a couple of weeks with test money. And they were like, this is great. This is really, really good. I'm kind of executing the strategies that I think I am, doing a really great job, making some gains. Do you think that continued on when they went from the play environment into the real environment?
I mean, it almost has to. And again, this goes back to the way that brains are working.
Yeah.
Once you notice something happen 2 times in a row, 2 times, that is when your brain, subconsciously, you may not even be aware of it, starts to identify a pattern. Same thing back on the evolutionary plane of the savannah. Once you recognize a pattern, and people do that a lot of the time, now you're expecting something. So you think that is going to continue. And you may not even realize that there is a pattern forming in your mind. But the point is that we're pattern recognizing machines. Our brain does it to conserve energy. If we think we can see something happening, we don't have to sit down and do a calculation. Maths are a lot newer than recognizing patterns when it comes to human discovery and intellect. So if we can see a pattern, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of effort to look through that and say, this isn't actually a pattern. It's statistically random. Until you understand the statistical likelihood of it, those kinds of things can happen. Yeah. Here's a good example is luck versus skill. This is something that can sound very boring, but luck is an element of everybody's life. And that doesn't mean that skill isn't. But in the world of investing, both elements are very relevant. Take 2 different things. Playing chess. There's not a lot of luck in chess. So if I play a grandmaster in chess, I'm going to lose every single game.
Yeah,
There's
guaranteed.
There's not going to be a game when I walk away and say, man, I really did well on that one.
Yeah.
I beat you, no problem. Every single time I'll lose. Now, if we play something like poker, there are people that are champions at poker. They're better than the average person.
Yeah.
But if we play one hand or two or even three, I might win one. I'll probably still lose overall, but I can win at least some of them.
Yes.
Because luck is involved there. Luck is a big element in investing. So it can give us the perception of, oh, I'm actually more capable at this than I believe I am, especially if I do a good job investing for a few weeks. That's true. Then you look at the data. How many people stay really good investors over the course of, say, 30 plus years? As far as I understand, there are 3 fund managers in history who have beaten their benchmark over a 25-year period. Just to say that again, out of all of the fund managers in the world to have ever existed, and that's probably hundreds of thousands, 3 of them have beaten the benchmark over 25 years. Those are not very good odds.
No.
So that's our starting point.
Yeah. I'm going to guess one of them is Warren Buffett.
No.
Really?
It's not Buffett because he technically doesn't own a fund. He owns Berkshire Hathaway,
True.
which is a holding company.
Yeah, okay.
And when he was part of a hedge fund back in the day, that folded up in 1961 or something like that. So he has done very well, but he technically doesn't fit that definition.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think, you know, that's something as well that like we talk a little bit about in terms of like survivorship bias, because one thing that the regular investor doesn't see easily, and I can't blame them for this, is, you know, if you're jumping into investing for the first time, you don't really know who's kind of come before you, right? So you don't have an idea of like how many people have actually dropped out in terms of fund managers or other investors or whatever it might be, because they've essentially failed. All we're really hit with is, you know, the latest fund manager in New Zealand advertising that they're the best annual results for the year, and we see that and we're like, oh, they must be amazing, they must be great. Then we see a different fund manager 3 months later advertising that they're the best, because that's the way that returns work, and it's all very variable. But what you're not seeing is, oh, well, how many fund managers actually started 10 years ago that now don't exist and lost everybody's money, or closed down because, you know, they determined that their strategy wasn't successful. You know, we're not seeing that stuff on the regular, but we are just seeing the winners, the survivorship bias, the, you know, winners being highlighted.
Correct. And that's true of all funds. It's especially true in the hedge fund game. This isn't quite as big as in New Zealand, but in the States, you might see that a huge number of hedge funds have beaten their benchmark over the last, 5 years or something. Let's avoid the fact that 5 years is actually a very short time frame when it comes to investing. So you don't want to make investment decisions based on a performance history that's the last 5 years. But over that time frame, if a bunch of those fund managers actually closed up their shop because they were failing, well, now it looks like instead of 25 out of 50 did really well, there were 100 originally. So it would have been 25 out of 100. That looks a lot worse. So there's a lot of other things. This actually ties into one of the other reasons for feeling more comfortable with indexing, and it goes into decision making. Again, a bit of a nerdy field, but helpful. This is kind of the red pill thing. When a person makes a good decision, they can feel a little bit more confident in what they're doing.
Yeah.
But a good decision can have a bad outcome. An example is, if I'm driving in my car and the signal or the light turns green, I'll look both ways, but I'm going to go because it's a green light and that's how traffic works. But that doesn't mean another car won't still hit me or enter into the intersection or something like that.
Sure.
Was going through the green light the bad choice? No. It's still the thing to do. Be aware of your surroundings. Likewise, I'm going to stop at a red light, but something bad can still happen then. Making a good decision can have a bad outcome, and that's very bizarre to hear, but it doesn't make it the bad choice. When we talk about indexing, here's where it gets kind of interesting. Most funds will underperform their index. I think you know this. I think the audience probably knows this. In the US, something like 88% of mutual funds will underperform their respective benchmark or index. Again, that's not great. In New Zealand, it's even worse. Something like 96% will underperform. That means if there's 20 funds available in New Zealand, one of them might do better. I don't want to be the one picking of those 20 funds saying, well, which is it actually going to be? I want to go with the odds that are best for me. So from that point of view, we want to make sure that we're making a good decision and we don't have to worry about the next hot thing. We're not always trying to compete and do the best option, because that's what shows through in the data that most people underperform in that instance. When you feel confident in your decisions, you can relax a little bit easier. There's typically less anxiety and less stress that goes with that. There's some data that support this in different styles of investing for people that are constantly looking for something new and spending multiple hours a night, looking for an investment or doing analysis. There's another approach, which is I have the index. I'll probably outperform most of those people anyway. So if a person is an overanalyzer, overthinker, they have analysis paralysis, or they tend to dwell on their decisions and choices a lot, or feel a lot of regret about things that they do, that's again where indexing can be helpful.
That is so true. As you said that, I was like, I'm so one of those people that dwells on decisions. And I was struggling when Christine and I were talking about this to verbalize exactly why I just love indexing, because, you know, all of our personal investments are in an index fund. All of mine and my husband's KiwiSaver and retirement savings in Australia and index funds.
Yep.
And I'm like, I just get so much calm out of that. And I can't really explain why, but I think it's that. It's like, I just never think about them. I never consider them anymore. I sometimes look into my balance to like give me a pep up, because I might want to just feel good that it's increased. I mean, pick your day. Yeah. But like, I just get so much personal enjoyment about not having to think about that stuff, because I think I'm naturally an overthinker, anxious type of person anyway. And so I've got enough other shit rattling around in my brain nonstop. I don't want my KiwiSaver investment strategy to also be taking up any space.
It's so true. I mean, how many people are listening or thinking right now, man, I just wish I had a little more stress, or one more thing I could add onto my plate. Like if there was something
I wish there was something else stopping me from falling asleep last night.
Could I be dwelling on anything else at this moment? I just want to ruminate a little bit on something.
Sounds joyful.
Yeah, I'm too happy and I don't feel enough worry in my life. So because of that, that has a flow-on effect too. So here's probably another way that indexing can be helpful. It's a little bit more abstract, but we just mentioned how most active funds will underperform their index. Therefore, an indexing approach will generally get a better outcome. And when I say better outcome, that means your money will likely grow more. That's a good thing. Now, growing your money more does have upsides and downsides, and that sounds very weird from a person that works in finance. But the point is that ending up with more wealth can lead to more opportunities or options for a person. Money is going to mean different things to different people. It's not my job to tell people that. It's everybody's own individual job to know what it is to them. And if you think about, why do I even care about money at all? It sounds like a ridiculous question, but try to answer it. I mean, really sit down and think, why do I care? There's going to be something that money does for you, or multiple things. Ending up with more money doesn't open up that happiness. It's not like you unlock the chest and then, angels sustain one long sustained note of a beautiful
joy and calm.
Yeah, if you can sing, feel free to plug that one in right there. So having more opportunity means that there are more things that you can do. How you use your money is a very individualized thing, but it can lead to unhappiness. It can lead to no results at all, or it can lead to increased levels of happiness. Some ways will be better at increasing a person's happiness than others. There's a video online I happen to have known about that shows these very ways, and there's a few that we'll kind of touch on. There's 5 specifically. It's based on some research from a couple of really brilliant people, Mike Norton and Elizabeth Dunn, over in the States and Canada. And what they find is that people that spend their money on things that give them back time tend to be happier than people that value things. So your time is very important. I was talking with somebody last week. really good example. She's gone through a bit of a medical event, and so because of that, she's had a brain injury. She can't give as much focus to things as she used to, or she'll basically have migraines and be put out of commission for days just trying to recover from that. She hates cleaning her house. She finds it very exhausting and draining. So now what she's done is say, I live in a small place. I'm going to pay a cleaner 1 day a week to come in for an hour, pay her $35. She's going to clean my place up, and then she doesn't have to think about it anymore.
Yep.
That's $35 once a week. And now she's getting back at least that hour, but even really a couple of days of time because it would exhaust her for that long. That's a really good use of money. She's even saying how happy she is about that.
Yeah.
That's a big upside.
Yeah.
Then the other thing that tends to really be beneficial for people is using money to buy experiences over things. There's reasons for that. Experiences are difficult to compare for people. So if I buy a car, I know exactly what other cars stack up against that, and it can be very difficult to break away from that. That's how people get caught up in the
status chasing. Yeah.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
An experience is individualized, and it gives a sense of memories as well, where you can go back, you can have photos, you can share that with friends and family, and then vicariously connect with them in that way.
Yes.
Experiences tend to make people happier than buying material things. So that's 2 examples of ways that you can do that. There are more, but that's one of the things where if indexing leads to better outcomes because it's a better decision, it can lead to more wealth, and that wealth can allow you to use your money that actually makes you a little bit happier. That's one of the nice things about it too.
I love that. That is so good, Cam. Christine and I are huge champions of talking about how we basically never feel bad about spending money on travel for that exact reason of like, it's an experience. It can't be replicated. You know, what she wants to do on her travel versus what I want to do is completely different. So you don't feel any kind of judgment or guilt or jealousy about other people. And it's very different to, you know, if Christine wants to go buy a handbag and all of a sudden I want that same handbag or a better handbag. It's like, you know, it is comparable. So yeah, I love that. This has been really, really great. So many amazing insights. Is there one last parting thing you would like people to kind of take away? If there's any kind of just number one tip, number one thing to think about with investing or knowing themselves?
I would just recap what we have talked about. Probably the 4 main ones would be diversification helps against loss aversion, so you're not quite as worried. Diversification through indexing means FOMO, that can be released. You can make smarter decisions through indexing as a starting point, and then because of that, you can outperform, end up with more wealth that you can use for more things. That would be kind of the main takeaway is those 4.
Yeah.
If you want to know more, I'm sure there's more out there, but we'll leave that for another time.
Yeah, perfect. I'm sure there will be more conversations off the back of this. But as always, for anyone listening, if you have any questions, we would love to hear from you. We can also connect you with Cam. He'll be plastered all over our Instagram at It's No Secret NZ, so you can reach out to him directly. He's in Christchurch, loves chatting with people. Obviously, a really great financial planner and advisor. So I'm sure more than happy to chat to anyone if they want to get into some of the nitty-gritty beyond this. Thank you so much, Cam, for joining us today. Hope it's been fun. Not too many numbers.
It's been a blast. Thank you, Kat.
Awesome. You're so welcome.